Okay, now we're considering number 138, R1. Ms. Gabbard. Ms. Gabbard.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
Great, and we'll dispense with distributing and waive that. I recognize the gentlewoman for the purpose of explaining her amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll keep this very brief. What my amendment does is simply strengthens the existing provisions that require the DoD to provide a public annual report on civilian casualties. My amendment promotes greater accountability and collaboration between DoD and the intelligence community for best practices so that we can decrease the likelihood of civilian casualties. It does this by reinstating the requirement of an annual public report on the number of strikes by DNI against terrorist targets outside of areas of active hostilities, and to provide an assessment of combatant and non-combatant deaths resulting from those strikes. This requirement is not unusual, and this committee passed a similar requirement in the FY18 NDAA for the DoD. We've received a waiver to consider this amendment today from the Intelligence Committee here in the House, which further enables us to exercise our oversight in Congress. Please support my amendment, support transparency and accountability. I yield back.
Thank you. Is there any debate on the amendment? Mr. Bacon?
Thank you. And I appreciate Ms. Gabbard's input on this. We need to have transparency on what we're doing with our remote piloted aircraft. And I think this bill has already done that. We have two provisions in the bill, Section 1063 that modifies the DoD's annual reporting requirements for DoD, and then Section 1086 that directs an independent assessment of DoD's reporting and policy on civilian casualties. Here's my concern and why I either think this amendment needs to be modified or not passed. This is forcing DoD to do reporting on intelligence missions, not DoD missions. And I think this is more germane for the Intelligence Committee, and it's more germane for our intelligence communities to do the reporting on civilian casualties on those missions that they're running. DoD's already going to do this for their missions. And I think that that reporting should come from DoD when it's a DoD mission, not doing a reporting on DNI-led missions. So I think this is a territory issue, frankly.
Well, the
I don't
gentleman
think our military wants to do that reporting on DNI. Yes, please.
Just a point of clarification.
Does the gentleman yield?
I do yield. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your raising this question and concern. The amendment specifically states that this report will come directly from DNI. So this is something that will not have to be conveyed through the DoD. DNI will report directly to Congress.
So why doesn't, a question back to you, if I may, why would not the Intelligence Committee be compelling DNI to do this versus the Armed Services Committee?
I think, as you know, there are a number of activities where there may be overlap. Mm-hmm. So this allows for our committee to exercise our oversight, obviously without getting into too many details here.
Okay. I just want to express my concern. I think this is more appropriate to come from the Intelligence Committee from DNI, but I do appreciate the fact hearing that DNI is providing the numbers. I think that's a step forward. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Waltz?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Just to reiterate Representative Bacon's comments, DoD already extensively reports on civilian casualties. In fact, the 2019 NDAA expanded the scope of what DoD has to report, and in fact, can make those reports public unless the Secretary of Defense decides that for a variety of reasons, one of which is that our enemies tend to use these reports as propaganda overseas, decides that they should be classified. But I could just tell you from personal experience, as someone who has called in drone strikes overseas, as someone who has called in airstrikes, as someone who has had to take down compounds and terrain because airstrikes were denied, I just want to impart on my colleagues the ripple effects of these types of reports and an overemphasis on these reports. We've had situations, and I personally experienced situations, where there is such an emphasis and so much demand and so many fingers and chests that come down the chain that we've actually had to send soldiers into locations, on the one hand, lost soldiers because airstrikes were denied of an over-concern of civilian casualties. And then on the other hand, lost soldiers because we had to go verify sites that were incredibly dangerous to ensure there were no civilian casualties. This is an incredibly important issue. And as someone who has had to make those life and death decisions, with a lawyer, with a JAG officer standing next to me, trying to decide if that ISIS fighter that we let go, or that commander that we let go, will end up killing more civilians down the road. If those civilians that are providing ammunition and support are indeed lawful combatants under the law of war. If the civilians that are with them are family members, but you have to make that unfortunate decision, I just think we need to pause for a moment and realize no military member wants to either intentionally, certainly not, or accidentally cause civilian casualties. And there is an extensive reporting already. I think by layering additional reports on, we not only send that additional pressure, which again can apply both ways, but we send a message, I think, to our commanders downrange who receive extensive training on these issues that they're not to be trusted. And when you have reports going through the chain coming to the Congress, it has some secondary, tertiary effects that I just don't think we fully appreciate here. I yield my time.
Ms. Stefanik?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. The protection of civilians is a fundamental part of all operations and DoD standards and policies reflected as my colleague, Mr. Waltz, just eloquently outlined based upon his personal experience. I want to make a few key points why I oppose this amendment. So first, as Representative Bacon and Mr. Waltz outlined, there are already provisions in the bill that increase the level of reporting of civilian casualties for DoD. Section 1063, that modifies annual reporting requirements. Section 1086, that directs an independent assessment of DoD's reporting and policy on civilian casualties. And in addition, this is on top of Section 1057, which was in the FY18 NDAA, which established a robust reporting mechanism for DoD, which is publicly available, which has been pointed out before. Second, on this committee, we talk frequently about the ballooning of reports and the cost on DoD. This chairman's mark already imposes 240 new reporting requirements. That's a 34% increase on our FY19 bill and a 79% increase for the FY18 bill. Third, this is not the job of the DNI, and our intelligence community should not be tasked in this matter. As one of the few members who sits on both HASC and HPSI, this raises significant jurisdictional issues. We have seen this amendment before, and this is the first time HPSI has ever waived jurisdiction. We're talking about the DNI, not the DoD here. So today we started off in this subcommittee not being able to get a waiver when we were talking about an Undersecretary for Defense, but yet now we can get a waiver from HPSI when we're dealing with the DNI. If we want to legislate on this, propose this amendment for the Intel Authorization Act, because it should not be included in this mark, which is one of the key reasons why I oppose it. And lastly, for members who are serious about preventing civilian casualties, rather than this amendment, we should agree to fully fund the DoD at $750 billion, which would restore readiness, it would modernize DoD, and supports surgical strikes and ISR training and operations that guarantee precise targeting with minimal civilian casualties and collateral damage. For these reasons, I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment. I yield back.
Okay, right. So just 2 points. First of all, I would be absolutely appalled if the Department of Defense would say that for $733 billion, they aren't as able to avoid targeting or hitting civilians. I would hope that within that range of money, they would be able to do as good a job as they can do. And the idea that an additional $17 billion is going to make it less likely that we kill civilians, if that's true, that's a heck of an indictment on what the Department of Defense is doing. I don't think it's true. I think the Department of Defense is working to try to limit civilian casualties.
Will the chairman yield, since in direct response to my comments?
Sure.
I appreciate that. As I said at the start of my comments, DOD has policies in place, and as we heard from Mr. Waltz, takes very seriously civilian casualties to avoid them at all costs. I highlighted the importance of an increased top line to rebuild readiness and to make sure we have the capabilities for surgical strikes.
Right, and that's
this was in addition to the jurisdictional issues. Yield back.
Reclaiming my time. That's what you said. The part that I'm quibbling with is the notion that somehow an extra $17 billion is going to make it less likely that they inadvertently kill civilians. That's the part that I'm quibbling with. I don't think that is an accurate argument. I will also point out that you're right, there are a lot of reports in this bill. Roughly half of those reports are Republican members' requests. And part of the reason we have so many reports is I bent over backwards to try to meet members' requests to make sure that the committee was bipartisan. And while I take the point that asking for reports does require something of DOD, our job is oversight. That's part of what we do. We have to try to balance that, but as I think in a bipartisan way, if you went back and see who requested the reports, you would see in a bipartisan way, we think exercising oversight is an important part of what we do, and that's why we do it. And certainly, part of oversight is trying to minimize civilian casualties and keeping an eye on that issue. Mr. Mitchell, I believe you are next up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe it's getting late and I've missed something. Can you confirm for me that we actually have a waiver from the Intelligence Committee? Is that correct?
Oh, my goodness, we need a waiver? Yes, we have a waiver.
Well, we jest about it, but we're talking about a significant reporting requirement.
I jest about the possibility that hadn't occurred to me prior to you bringing it up, not about the
indictment of comment, sir. It was not an indictment of comment. We talk about, we have a waiver from intelligence on this, which is a significant reporting requirement, has been noted by many, yet a one-word amendment to add the word subsidy to last year's NDAA as it relates to Hawaii, pronunciation, results in a referral to 7 committees. Do we see some problem with how this is working?
It didn't work. If the gentleman will yield.
Certainly, of course.
It didn't work any better when we were in the minority.
I'm sorry?
I said it didn't work any better when we were in the minority. So I hear you. It's an imperfect process, as I said at the outline. I should also take this opportunity to point out that the Intel Committee actually has been very cooperative. I was critical of them earlier. I apologize for that. I was wrong about what they were doing. They've actually been cooperative. So I appreciate the opportunity to publicly retract those comments. I yield back.
Reclaiming my time, let me suggest that if we go on the theory that every time we believe something's been overlooked when they were in the minority, this institution is not going to function very well long term. So while you didn't like how it functioned, you said it, we have to strive to find a middle ground on some of this stuff. And I'll yield back, but I'm just astonished. Apparently, Ms. Cheney.
If you yield to me, just one quick point.
If you can, but Ms. Cheney's harassing me.
Very quickly. I didn't imply that it was better or worse in the minority than the majority. It's no different. I think it works the way it works, and I think it works perfectly fine. We do work in a bipartisan sort of way.
With all due respect, Mr. Chair, a referral to 7 committees for one word is pretty. I mean, maybe it's my 35 years in private business, but I've got to say, oh, holy crap, you've got to be kidding. And I'll yield the remainder of my time to Ms. Cheney. I'm sorry, Mr. Who?
I'd like to yield my time to Ms. Stefanik.
I just want to reiterate the point regarding the jurisdictional issues. Again, there are very few members that sit on both HPSCI and HASC. I am one of them. This is an issue where, at the beginning of this committee hearing, we were talking about an Undersecretary of Defense that we could not get HPSCI to waive for renaming, but yet we are now asserting jurisdiction over the DNI This is an overreach. This is not the oversight role of this committee. This should be in the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and this should be debated as part of the Intel Authorization Act. I think this sets a bad precedent, and I think this further confuses and further complicates jurisdictional issues, which are already tough enough between those two committees. Just wanted to reiterate that point. It's important for members to know whether you're on HPSI today or whether you have future members on HPSI. I know many of these members are interested in serving on HPSI. With that, I yield to Mr. Bacon.
Just real briefly, I am quite confident the military does not want to take responsibility for reporting for D&I missions. That's the concern here. This is a D&I mission. They should be doing the reporting. And I know our military does not want to take responsibility for reporting on their operations. I yield back.
Is there further debate?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Thornberry.
I hesitate to get into quibbles, as you say, but as I have told you privately, I do think that while it is absolutely true, both sides have used outside committee waivers to their advantage. I do think this year has been different. It has been more restrictive, more difficult, more things have been referred to outside committees than before. So I do quibble that what's happened this year is the way that it's always happened. I think it has been different, and it has been more restrictive on members. And maybe it's been more restrictive on both Republicans and Democrats, but it has been different.
Further debate? All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed? No.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Thank you. Recorded vote has been requested. We'll suspend this vote until we are done with full committee mark.